Hello, Barbara. Good to see you. Thank you for
Hello,
joining
Emma.
me.
Hi.
So, you've watched a lot of these then. You know the format. So,
Yeah.
let's get to know you a little bit then by asking you the question. Can you tell us that story about how you came to Quakers? What were you seeking and what did you find?
Okay, I guess for me, it's quite a long journey. I first went to Quaker meeting. It was just after my 30th birthday, I think. Um, and the way I got there, I want to go right back to the day I was born because I was born into a Jewish family. So all my family are Jewish, um, but not my immediate family, mum and dad, were not I guess you say practicing Jewish people, but we did a few things. But from a very early age, from about 7, I completely rejected the idea of being Jewish for lots of reasons. And one of the reasons was that nobody seemed to be able to tell me what being Jewish meant. So if I said, why do we do this? It would be, oh, because you're Jewish. That's why. My dad said that he did not believe in God. He was very anti-religion because he said religion had done lots of evil things in the world.
Mm.
My mum never spoke about it at all. But because we lived in quite a Jewish area, not an Orthodox Jewish area, I mean, at all, there was still peer pressure on my parents to do something. So I had to take certain days off school, um, because it would just be like my parents could not have faced their neighbors and relatives if I had gone to school on that day. So I rejected being Jewish,
Mm.
but I didn't reject religion. I was really interested in my friends who went to church. So, and I mean, looking back, I think some of it might have been when I say wanted to be like everyone else, I was in a town where, or an area where I wasn't sticking out for being Jewish at all, but I had this incredible interest in what was going on in church as well. Anyway, I toddled along like this, like through school, through university, um, and the big change came when I had graduated and I spent a year working in a night shelter for homeless teenagers in Rotherham in South Yorkshire. And this was like sometimes I describe it as like the year of my political, spiritual, social awakening because I was faced with this, just incredible poverty, deprivation, and I couldn't get my head round how this was allowed in our society.
Mm.
And at the same time, I became really quite anti-war as well. And looking back, during university, there'd been the Falklands War, which I just wasn't interested in. And then suddenly, I became really anti-war. And also that interest in Christianity sort of bubbled up again. And when I look back, I think it was almost like this sense of love, that there was a kind of lack of love in some of these situations,
Mm.
like sitting in this night shelter with these teenagers who weren't much younger than me. I was only 21, 22, and listening to their stories had such an effect on me that's never left me really. The following year, I went to do teacher training at a college in Oxford, which was a Methodist college. And also, a lot of the people who were on the course with me were Christians in the sense of born again Christians, and they're very evangelical and they wanted to convert me. And they saw me as a great challenge because I had been born into a Jewish family. This is like, but there was something so appealing about it all. And I went to chapel like twice a day. They had lovely service, compline before bed. I just loved
Mm.
it. And so I was in my early 20s. And over the next few years, I remained part of Christian churches. Now, my friends said, doesn't matter what denomination you go to, but you got to go where you find Christ and Jesus. And I so wanted to believe it all. I really did. I got baptized baptized, like full immersion in a Baptist church. I went to, I think they call them house groups, which were quite charismatic, and people would be singing in tongues. And yeah, I loved it all, but deep down, I didn't really believe it. And also, I felt embarrassed about telling people. So, I mean, my dad and my brother actually came to my baptism, which I thought was pretty brave of them. And my mum never mentioned it, even now. I don't know if I go and see her this afternoon and say, "What did you think when I got baptized?" She'll probably change the subject and talk about the weather.
Mhm.
So, but I was in this world. I'd got a Bible, I was reading the Bible, but there was still something within me that didn't feel like I wasn't telling my workmates where I was going and things like that. But I carried on like this. And then it was end of 1990. So I'm just coming up to my 30th birthday. And I was going to it was a C of E church where I was living. It's a city church. It's really big, really lively, evangelical. Um, and it was a time of one of the Gulf Wars. And the vicar uh, sent round a newsletter to everyone in the parish. It wasn't just people in the church, saying that this was a just war and we should be supportive of it. And
Ah.
that was it. That was it for me, that moment, because I remember even what I was thinking when I read this. And it was, if Jesus existed, and this minister definitely believed Jesus existed, and Jesus said the things that you preach every Sunday, you really believe this, you really believe that what's in the Bible is true, then how can you be saying this is a just war and we should be supporting a war? And it was that clear. I thought, I cannot go back. And with hindsight, I think maybe I should have arranged to have a little chat with him, but I didn't. I
Mhm.
did actually go back for the singing for a little while, but not for very long. Anyway, I thought I can't go back there on Sunday mornings, but I'd heard of Quakers and I knew that Quakers were against war. And um, I sent off for a pack because there were adverts in papers then, probably The Guardian, sent off for a pack. But I also knew that there was a big city Quaker meeting within a few hundred yards of where I lived. So I went along there and it was quite full. And later I heard that that Sunday, more people had gone to church than usual because we were going to go and invade Iraq or whatever. Um, so, and when I got there, I realized I recognized people and they were all very friendly to me. And I guess socially it fitted with me and their political views fitted with me. So I carried on going. I wouldn't, but there's a big but coming, so that this is not the end of the story. Um, so yeah, I carried on going. I was there were some people my age there, um, and I took part in lots of things. Through a mutual friend, I met my husband, who's not a Quaker, but we had a Quaker wedding. Our children were welcomed into Quakers. I was on the children's committee. I was taking the children. So doing lots of things. I was really involved. But at the same time, I couldn't say what Quakers were, like in a nutshell, to people who asked me. I don't know if other people had this problem, but when people would say, "Oh, what do Quakers believe?" It was all in negatives. It was like, "Oh, we don't believe in war. We don't sing. We don't have ministers or vicars." Um, and the only positive thing was like, "Oh, we believe there's that of God in everyone." And
Mm.
that didn't really make sense to me because it was always couched in terms of there's that of God in everyone, and therefore we're not going to kill them because there's a bit of God in them. But I
Mm.
was thinking, what? Most people don't even believe in God. So I couldn't work that out. It didn't sort of make sense to me very much. But I still carried on going to Quakers. I was really involved. And I had been going for about 15 years like this. Like my children were coming along and everything for about 15 years. And then something happened. So we had, I'm trying to remember what it was called, Hearts and Minds Prepared.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's like a study pack, and our meeting was doing it, and we took it really seriously, and we met every 2 weeks, and I did my homework. And then one of the books that was just there for us to read was called Light to Live by Rex Ambler. And it's where he sort of introduces experiment with light. And I've still got the book because our meeting had to move premises. I ended up with a lot of books, so I've kept this actual one. Um, I don't know if you're familiar with Experiment with Light, but it's Rex Ambler was trying to look at what the early Quakers might have been doing and came up with this process. But basically, it's sitting there, minding the light, paying attention to what's going on inside you when you're still and silent, and um, and just sitting with what comes up, um, seeing the reality of your life, which can be uncomfortable, and just submitting to what you're being shown. And anyway, in this little book, was really, really small. I read it in like an afternoon. And at the back, he had the words of the meditation. There were lots of different versions, but this was one. And I just sat there at the end of my bed, trying to, God, I realize I've been talking without almost a breath. um, so I went through the meditation on my own, just sitting there, and so I read it in the book, and then I left a little bit of gap to see what would happen. And no joke, but the issue that was most on my mind at that point was, I don't know if you've got kids or anything, but this was my child misbehaving in a playground in full view of lots of other parents. I mean, it sounds pretty banal, but it's pretty big. And I didn't seem to be able to stop this happening on a daily basis. And that was what the big issue was for me. And then I just sat there with this, just sat there, sat there. And then after 30 minutes, why can't I do anything about it? That was my thing. Why can't I do anything about it? And then it was like subtly changed to, why won't you do anything about it? And
Mm.
it doesn't sound much when I say it, but it sort of changed the focus for me to, why aren't you doing anything about it? And I came up with some ideas which I didn't usually think about, and then sorted out the problem. And he stopped fighting because of what I had chosen to do. And I thought, wow. So I tried to do this meditation again and again. And I just think this is amazing. And I went back next time to our Hearts and Minds Prepared. So everyone's got to read this book. And for me, it was suddenly a way of like going right back to when I was in the evangelical churches. What did they mean when they said God speaks to me? What do they mean? I mean, you could pray for something. You could pray for like, I don't know, like, I actually heard people praying for car parking spaces. You can pray for a car parking space and then you get a car
Yeah.
parking space. But when it's, but I, prayer for me is not that. But this seemed to be a form of prayer. Um, and suddenly it was there's that of God within me, which I can access by being still and, yeah, still, not so much the silence, being still and really just looking within. And then we talk about the light within or the inward light. And suddenly I thought, wow, you can get it.
Yeah.
And I was just like wow, wow, that is how I think about it. And suddenly, and it was sudden, um, then the Quaker way made sense to me. And now I could, when people ask me what's Quakers about, now usually you'd say, well, it depends which Quaker you're asking. But for me, it's as if you sit quietly and still paying attention to what's going on within you, then for me, it's like I can find like strength or guidance, love, that sense that I have within me. It's how, when people ask me about God, I've always been like, I don't know. But now I think there is that of God within me. And this is going to sound really daft. I don't know how it got. You know, some people when they like they might think of like radio waves. It's all out there, and we're all sort of tapping into it. Like when we talk about a gathered meeting, um, but I think for me, this is my image. I'm not saying it's real. My image that I've got something within me, and I can picture it as like a gold jewel or something.
Mm.
Now, it could be just like when I talk about this with some people, they think, oh, that's just sort of psychological or physiological. It's nothing supernatural. But I think, well, it could have been there since the beginning of time. I don't know how it got there, but for me, it's something that is not me. Um, so, so that really, so where did I get to? So I've been going to Quakers for 15 years before I read this book.
Mm.
And I had, because I told you that I'd been around different churches and things, I didn't want to apply for membership too soon in case this was another passing fad. Then I had children and life got so busy I couldn't even find time to write the letter to the clerk. But then when I read this book, I thought, no, this is it. I've got to become a member. And so I became a member. Um, and it so and so that's where I am Quakers at the moment. And
Mm.
when I said it made sense of Quakers, you know, when people talk about, do chip in and ask me anything because I just been
Keep going,
talking.
keep going.
When people talk about Quaker values and Quaker testimony, I think sometimes I think we're coming at it from the wrong direction.
Mm.
So there's some people in our meeting, we were talking about it, and someone said, I really struggle with, and I can't remember which testimony it was, testimony to peace or simplicity. I really struggle with that. And I was thinking, I think you're coming at it from the wrong direction because I think testimony is what we're sort of led to do. And that's our testimony. And then if enough people are led to do the same thing, I guess, and we're testing it out with each other, then that becomes like a corporate group testimony. But it's not like a law or a rule saying this is to be a Quaker, you've got to try and um, do this. I think if you're paying attention to what's happening within, in that stillness and silence, you feel led to live your life in a certain way. And it might still be difficult, but it's coming from it's coming from somewhere deep within. And if it's something that's a bit off piece, you would need to be testing it with your group and like discerning whether this is the right way.
Mm.
But when you really feel led to do something, it's not a struggle in the sense of being a chore. You do it to the best of your ability, but I feel it's like being guided.
Mm.
So so that's where I am. So when I hear about people talking about Quaker values, I
Mm.
think they're all good values, but for me, the core of where I am with Quakers right now is somewhere different. And it and I find it, and then I get a bit cross. Well, do I get cross? Because there's lots of like Quaker outreach going on at the moment, and I think, oh no, that's not what I would have said. And I think, well, maybe you should go and say it. I do, but the interesting thing is, I could talk more about experiment with light and now group. We have an experiment with light group. So I've been speaking about how it is for me personally,
Mm.
but we have a group that's I didn't set it up. Luckily, there was someone else in my meeting who was bold enough to set up the group, and that's still going. So that's been going now for, we think it's 15 years. 2009, we
Mm.
started it, and it had a gap for COVID. And we've got 7 or 8 people coming regularly to this group. So what happens in the group? We start off and we say, hello, how's your day been? And then we settle down and we listen to the meditation, which lasts about 35 minutes. And then after that, um, we have time alone to reflect on what we've done, what came up for us, and Some people write, some people draw. Um, and then we have about 20 minutes or however long it takes in our group to share our experience. And we do it in a really strict way. So we allow people to say, a bit like ministry, we don't comment, we don't discuss, and then we don't refer to it when we're sharing. It just, someone described it as witnessing the work of the light or the spirit in other people. It's just there. And we hear it, and we really strict that we never mention that again, not even if we see the person for tea during the week. And that has had an effect of really like strengthens the group in an interesting way because they know that you've heard what they've said, but you're not going to quiz them. And what's the expression? Getting to know each other in the ways that are eternal.
Mm.
And I think that's what it does. And then I compare it to weekly meeting for worship. And I think in a way, I tried meeting for worship is different because I'm not focusing just on me. I'm focusing on the group. But I do try and get into that space, and sometimes it's more difficult to get into that space. But then I think of it in terms of like the 35 minutes meditation, which is mainly silent. There's little prompts, but it's silent really. Um, and then afterwards, we sort of share, which could be seen as ministry. And it lasts a long time. It's about an hour and a half to 2 hours that we take. Um, So there is a big difference between that and meeting for worship.
Mm.
But that getting into that deep space and then sharing what happened, I just think is so valuable. So yeah, so that's where I am with Quakers. I love it. I love what I have found in Quakers. Um, I love that bit. So I'll stop there. That's
Well,
my
it's
journey.
yeah, it's such a great story, and so much of what you've said resonates with me. So there's a lot of different things that I want to talk
Yeah.
about there. Um, can I go back to something you said at the very beginning about I just don't believe it? So when you were talking about the kind of the Christian
Mm,
background, and obviously it was very meaningful for you,
yeah.
but there was something that you were holding back about belief, and I just wonder if you can say a bit more about that because. One of the things that somebody said to me in a conversation like this was belief is not really so much about an intellectual thing. It's about what do you trust in?
Mm,
And that
yeah.
really helped me to think of it belief as trust.
Mm,
So I just wonder if where are you up to with your belief in God? What's your relationship with Christ?
yeah.
How do you use Jesus in your
Yeah.
ministry or in your thoughts? Where are you up to with that at the moment?
So when you said trust, that is how I used to um I did use that as a kind of helpful way. So way back when my Christian friends were trying to help me as a new Christian, they would try and explain it rationally sometimes, reason, which didn't really work because I thought, well, what you're taking as the basis for your reason, we can't really prove. But I did try and trust in that sense. What I really remember, which I don't get from my Quaker faith so much, or the Quaker way, is that sense of, oh, you're being loved and you're being held by something that you can't see. And I was saying to my husband's not a Quaker, my husband's a Zen Buddhist. But I was trying to explain that I remember that it was very comfortable and I can see why it's so appealing to people. Like I went to the local Baptist church last year. Um, we had like the people from different churches just visited other ones and they did it in alphabetical order. Um, so we're Oakhampton Quakers, and I had to visit Oakhampton Baptist or something. But anyway, as I walked in, I remembered that sort of warmth, the sense of community, the socially much more diverse than our Quaker meeting. Um, and then I loved the singing. And then when the sermon came, I thought, it's the God tells us to do this, or I was trying to sort of convert it into language that, okay, made sense to me, but there were some bits where it got there and I thought, no, I just can't. So where am I with God and Christ, Jesus? So I don't think, I, d- I don't believe in, I don't think of God as a person or even who created everything. But I do think there is something, like I was trying to explain, that I think there is something that I can access that I would say is not me. And that is what I would describe for me as God. And I would use the word spirit. And when it comes to, so I think it was George Fox who said Christ has come to teach his people himself or something. And I think, yeah, I get that. I get that. Um, and that he, and I mean, I did used to read the Bible, but sometimes I think, actually, as a result of watching some of these conversations, I should go back and sort of read the Gospels again and start with Mark or something. But he often said, follow me,
Mm.
not like bow down and worship me. It was follow me. And I wonder if what he was trying to get people to see was that you've got that within you. You know, he said things like, when I've gone, you'll still have that, I'll still be with you.
Mm.
So that is how I perceive it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
It's so interesting because I resonate a lot with what you say, especially when you then said about the result of this is that when people talk about values and testimony, they're getting this whole thing the wrong way round. And I suppose one of the things I want to do is to bring people back to where does it come from?
Mm,
This is where, once you feel this, there's such a sense of security in that
mm,
that you as you said, you feel led.
mm,
You can do no other. It's like, well, this is what I'm led to do. That
mm,
is my testimony.
mm,
And it's one of the
mm,
things that surprises me really about Quakers today, that there's so much talk about the testimony to this, that, and the other, but much less talk about where it's come from.
mm.
And
Yes.
then how are we going to know if we believe in continuing revelation? How will we know that the new testimonies are not the important ones now?
Mm,
How
yeah.
will we know that if we never really, if we're never really focusing on, well, what is the spiritual experience that's
Mm,
led to this?
mm,
If we don't know how to question that, we end up with people kind of just spouting what was important for Quakers 50 years ago or 200 years ago.
mm,
Um, and that's what worries me really, is that this ongoing experience is what we must talk about more and share more and
mm,
question more and understand more.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Because I was thinking, so I've spoken about when I came across Experiment with Light, but there'd been big things in my life before that. So when I spoke about working in the night shelter, I don't know where that feeling came from, but it felt, I think I used the term love, that certain things, I was witnessing certain things. I think, oh God, this is crazy. Um, and I thought, the people doing this aren't bad people. I mean, I witnessed sort of police behavior, which really shocked me because up to that point, I had quite a comfortable middle of the road upbringing where I think I was brought up that if you don't break the law and don't do bad things, you'll be okay. And the police are there as your friends. And if you're ever in trouble, you stop a
Mm,
policeman. And
mm,
I was seeing things and I thought, I can't, this is completely new for me. So I had this real sense that there are certain things which are right at a really, really deep level or wrong at a really deep level. And I don't know where that came from. And I think now, if I feel strongly about something, I think that's my touchstone. Love, I
mm.
guess you could say. Does it Does it chime with that? And there's the expression God is love. So maybe that's what it is. That's where it comes from. And then another part of my life is I'm a breastfeeding counsellor with an organisation called La Leche League.
Oh,
And I so there's part of the work is like helping mums with the sort of say nuts and bolts breastfeeding. But the other part is helping mums become mothers and sort of I like I describe it as like when you sink down into motherhood. So they might be struggling with broken nights and they've not got time to do anything else, not even sort of go for a bath or anything. And it's all a big struggle. And then by talking to other mums in the group or when they have sunk down into this sort of sense of love, it's still a struggle. They're still waking up at night, but it's not from that place of this shouldn't be happening. And that came to me before I found Experiment with Light and everything. And again, it's coming from that place of love, I think. And also, I was always quite interested. I said to my kids, oh, I should apply to do an Eva Cox scholarship. And what I wanted, I quite like the idea of being at Woodbrook for 6 weeks, but anyway, that's gone. Um, was when we say, take heed to the promptings of love and truth in your own heart. What does that mean? It's not just you read something and you think that's what I should do. It's coming from somewhere deep within. And I think for me, an example of that, not a metaphor, but an example was mums and babies when they just know this is the right thing that I'm doing.
mm,
So when you said, where do these testimonies, where do these beliefs come from? I think it's from that sense of love.
yeah.
And And sometimes we know that we can't do what we think is really important. But I think then we should say, I really believe is important and society is not allowing me to do it. I don't know.
Mm,
I mean, another thing I've got is school, is how we treat children in school. And why is no one, well, it's not no one. Why isn't everyone saying what we are doing with children in school and the pressure they're put under and all the exams they have to take is awful, but it's not a Quaker testimony. So there's lots of things in the world which I think come from, for me, from where does it come from? If it's not based in love, then I would be questioning it. So maybe that's where it comes from for me.
mm. Well, that's such interesting. I mean, I just think it's such a wonderful ministry you've just described there about motherhood. It's just, it really is. It's lovely. It's lovely. Um, and there's such a depth to what you've said, such a loving ministry, really, to help
Mm.
young mothers with that.
Mm.
Mm. So let's talk a bit about the experiment with light then, because
Yeah.
one of the things I like to do is start and focus at the beginning on our spiritual practice.
Mm.
And what I can see you saying is that your experiment with light practice has really supplemented your meetings for worship
Mm.
over the years.
Mhm.
And that really chimes with me. And I would go so far to say that if I didn't have my prison ministry,
Mhm.
where on a weekly basis for about 15 years now, I've been going in and running. I mean, now that you've described and reminded me about an experiment with light, I can think, oh yeah, of course it's very similar to what I'm doing.
Mm.
With a group of people who were very unfamiliar with Quaker ways.
Mm.
So I'm having to do it in quite a structured and guided way.
Mm.
But if I didn't have that deep process, I'm
Mm.
not sure that meeting for worship would have been enough to sustain
Mm.
me.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
would go as far to say it as that, is that I became very aware within the first year of me, going in every week and having such deep experiences that I would then come back full of it, and it would be part of my ministry and part of my conversations with my meeting. But I'm not sure if if I hadn't had that, what would I be doing with myself? Would I
Mm.
still be able to be a Quaker? Because there's just not enough. What do we say? There's just not enough routine depth together on a Sunday morning in 1 hour.
Mm.
There's
Oh,
just not enough.
I so agree with you. And in our meeting, some people go to other things. So there's people who do experiment with light, but some people go to I think it's a Buddhist group. And I haven't been along. Maybe I should go along and see what it is they're getting there that they're not,
Mm,
that is like extra. Um, but I absolutely agree with you. And I think I've read somewhere that someone said that we expect meeting for worship once a week. We put too much on it.
mm,
For me, it should be the culmination, not of the week. Um, and I agree with you. I often don't get from meeting for worship what I get from experiment with light. And I do experiment with light, I'd say is like when I say my daily practice, I don't mean I do it every day, but I do it on my own. And there's an app you can get on your phone. It's so great. So you just press the button, you sit there, you hear the words. Um, Fantastic.
yeah,
And um, so when so that's what I do, and I find it really strengthening. And then also you get to the point where you don't need to sit there. Like there have been times like I say crisis points, like when not that I'm having a panic attack or anything, but I think, okay, you can get into that space where you can access that. And maybe that's a kind of prayer, like, oh, help me, help me.
mm,
Um, but yeah, because when I was talking to my husband about this, I was thinking, would I still be going to Quakers if I hadn't found Experiment with Light?
mm,
And but I haven't found anything, well, not that I've looked. I'm very happy with Quakers. Um, but yes, we have people in our meeting's quite small. And so when we turn up, because I used to be in a big city meeting and now I'm in a small town meeting. And after COVID, the numbers never came back.
mm, mm,
And so when you go into a meeting for worship on a Sunday, there's also things that you have to be aware of, like someone's in charge, whoever's sort of, we don't even have formal roles anymore, but someone is there making sure that everything's going okay. We've got a newcomer coming in. Are they okay? The person who might come in and be potentially disruptive. So it's quite difficult to sink down into that, which if we had more
mm.
people, you'd know, okay, I don't have to worry today because someone else is doing the worrying. But when it's a small meeting and it's a public meeting, you do have to be conscious of other things. So I, yeah, absolutely vital for me to have that other stuff going
Yeah.
on.
And you see, somebody mentioned to me, and I've got to the point now where I've done so many, I can't remember who
Oh,
said.
I bet.
Um, but there was something about, friends in the early days, these are the public meetings, as you've just said.
Mm,
And actually, there would be private meetings or
mm,
retiring meetings, I think they called them. And that makes absolute perfect sense.
mm,
And we've lost so much. We've stripped it all back because perhaps people don't realize the importance of them. They don't see that the reason that a public meeting for worship for 1 hour on a Sunday could be such a vital experience is because
mm.
of all of these things leading up to it.
Yes.
And if you haven't got that in your life, either because you're doing it individually or with another group, or you've got something else going on like we have, then meeting for worship on a Sunday is always going to be a fairly lightweight experience.
Mm. Yeah, I agree totally. So, like I said, we're quite a small meeting at the moment, but I was thinking, do you know, my lounge is big enough to invite people over like every couple of weeks or once a month, just to could even start with questions like you're asking people. And we do have the experiment with light. Um, but that's all we have. But I completely agree with you. So we had a newcomer last week. I don't know how she found out about us, but she's really seeking. And after tea, I just went, I don't want to put newcomers on the spot because they might never come back. But she was asking deep questions about Quakers. And then she said, so what actually happens? Because that was an hour's silence. And she said, I was really glad that three people said something during that silence because I'm not quite sure how I would have handled it.
Mm.
And I wasn't quite sure what I should have been doing in that silence. And those are the kind of questions that people want to know the answers to,
Yeah,
not um, what activity what action you're taking part in or something like that. And I was thinking, oh, that really prompted me to think we need to help those newcomers, or even not newcomers, people who've been coming a long time,
indeed. Yes.
what's actually going on.
Yeah. And that's one of been my preoccupations really for the last 15 years. I mean, the first 5 years I was in Quakers, these things didn't trouble me at all because I was so amazed by what I'd found.
Mm,
The hour on the Sunday was great for me and the community and all of that. But then after about 5 years, I started to think along these lines.
mm,
Um, and I just worry that we have to, in teaching terms, you can call it scaffolding or
mm,
structuring people's experience because otherwise, if there is only a silent meeting, as you say, people who are not confident enough or secure enough in their own just personality, really,
mm,
if they haven't reached a certain level of maturity to stay in an experience that they don't understand. Most people
mm,
just run away. I think like, oh, I don't
mm,
understand that. And I
mm,
don't know what I'm supposed to do, so I'm going to leave. So,
mm,
and obviously, in my prison ministry, I'm very aware that I'm going to have men come who've never been to church before, leave alone done a spiritual practice before. And I have to kind of give a lot of confidence and reassurance. That's the thing.
mm,
It's reassurance within it,
mm,
holding what people say.
mm,
And there's some so when people talk about the lack of confidence we have, and we need to
mm,
speak confidently about Quakerism, they then
mm,
talk confidently, I think, about the testimony to peace and
mm,
explaining what we do. And I think that's not what I mean by confidence. It's having the spiritual confidence and the presence to hold people and
mm,
reassure them that this is the path that's a very helpful path for them to be on. And I don't
mm,
think there's very many people in any given Quaker meeting who are able to do it.
mm, mm.
That sounds terrible, doesn't it?
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I do find that even now, when people talk about what is Quakers about, it really depends on who you ask. And like if you go to the website of Britain Yearly Meeting, and that's your um, first connection with Quakers, you think, oh, I've heard about Quakers, I want to find out more. You have to search quite a long way to find like what we've been talking about this morning. You find a lot of other information, and for other people, that might be the big thing about Quakers. That's what's really important. So I don't, I don't like to think, oh, there's only one way. And when we talk about, oh, we're a society of seekers, I feel that I've found, no, I haven't found the answers. I have found where I need to look. I
Mm,
think someone described it like, oh, you found the treasure chest. You haven't found the answer, but you know where to look.
mm,
So I don't want to say I'm still seeking all the time, like for guidance and what to do next and how I am in the world. But it's like I've found where to look. And also what when I talk about experiment with light, I don't think that's the only way. But I think for me, that was a way where, now it makes sense. And I think maybe some people find that like as soon as they come into a Quaker meeting, or if they've been brought up Quakers, um, maybe they've been taught it.
mm,
Maybe I just was a slow learner. But for 15 years, and even before that in my Christian churches, it was very much more a sense of you say something or you sit quietly or you pray and trust, like the word you use, trust that something will happen. But now I've got like evidence that stuff can happen.
mm.
Yeah. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, it does. And I suppose one of the reasons why I'm doing these interviews is because I want to give space to the people who have found things.
Oh,
I
mm,
want to give priority, really. So I suppose one of my thoughts is that, I know you talk about the BYM website as an example. One of my observations is that there's a lot of vocal people who can talk really well about, some anti-war protest
mm,
or some very worthy, very worthwhile
mm,
things, but they can't sit in a room and lead some kind of worship session, which I do week in, week out. So I see this,
mm,
I can see what I do a week in, week out, and I don't see the same things in all of these very, very vocal people, helping
mm,
people to center down, holding the space for people to find a spiritual path.
mm,
I mean, in a prison ministry, we're being asked much more difficult questions than you get in a Quaker meeting.
mm,
So they're not usually theological in the sense of what do Quakers think about the Trinity, although I have had that. Um, More often, it's how do I pray? How do I find
mm,
God? Is God with
mm.
me? Now, I have found answers to all of those things. And I don't know if you've listened to the wonderful interview that I did with Harvey Gilman,
Not
where
yet, no. I was looking at yeah, I've left him at the moment. I will listen.
so one of the wonderful things that we came to in that was how prayer is really like, sorry,
Hmm.
thank you, please, wow. And I've
Mm,
used that now. And what I often say to the men, is really it starts on your knees if you can, or even if you just do it in your imagination rather than physically. It's this feeling of giving yourself to God and letting that energy and that love bathe you. And
mm,
in that space, say sorry, say thank you, say please, say wow. And you can see they just melt,
mm,
you know?
mm,
And so that's my experience for over a decade.
mm.
Taken me a long time I can do it in a very short space of time now, very quickly with people. And and then know that I've only got 5 minutes with them
Mm.
and I have to leave. And, you can't leave people in a mess. You have to find
No.
them come back to. And that's where the wow really helps, focusing on how amazing life is.
Yeah.
And then I go to meeting and people are talking about all sorts of everyday things, which is fine, and sociable things, which is great, and even activist things, which is wonderful. But the number of times I'll have a conversation of this depth is almost never.
Mm,
And that's really been the motivation for me to do these interviews.
mm. And I think there is hunger might be too strong a word, but I think there is a desire for people to want to speak at that level, but it's where is the opportunity? Um, yeah, and where do you get that? And yeah, and also I like having say like having conversations, but sometimes you meet people who aren't religious at all from another religious tradition, just people I meet in other activities, and you find yourself having a conversation, and you are at that deep level,
Mm,
and it can come from somewhere else, but that deep connection, when you're actually talking about where does it come from,
mm.
I think is really, really great.
And I suppose one of the things I want to start conversations is about is what can we do either on Sunday mornings, which I think is a crucial part. I know people say, oh, well, we need to move it to other times as well, and we probably do. But I still think that within Britain today, Sunday mornings actually are a very important
Mm,
space in the week.
hmm
And I think what can we do on a Sunday morning that extends and deepens and where you can give people the space who do have the confidence to hold these kinds of spaces? how do you encourage that and privilege that almost
Mm.
before you then get into the kind of the social aspect and coffee and chit chat, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. The meeting I used to go to when I first came to Quakers was a bigger meeting. It had its own meeting space. And sometimes it did have, so the meeting was 10:30 to 11:30. And sometimes it did have stuff that went on from 9:30 to 10:30,
Mm.
um, which was great. And I remember going to some Bible study. Um, Sometimes it was more sort of beauty. Yeah, but it was like there was space, there was time when you did that. We've spoken in our meeting about, oh, could we have an experiment with light, say, on Sunday? But I don't think the timings would work. But
Mm.
yeah, I there's definitely a need for
Yeah.
something more because it's very comfortable for the people that already know. Some of the people who already know, but not everyone.
No.
And we've had people in our meetings say, oh, it would be good to talk more about what we're doing, but it's finding that space.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed Hearts and Minds Prepared as well. I mean that must have been very early on for me when I was
Mm,
in Quaker. So again, you see, the first 5 years they'd started Quaker Quest, which I went to
mm.
every Wednesday as it happens, and they also started Hearts and Minds Prepared then not long after that. So I had this enrichment,
Yes.
and we just don't seem to have that in a routine way. It requires local elders to have the energy and the
Yeah.
creativity and I suppose one of the things I'm wondering is once I finish this kind of range of interviews that I'm doing, whenever that feels like it's coming to a close, I don't know. Um, I wonder whether there's something now that we do have the technology in all meetings,
Mm,
almost all meetings have technology for this kind of thing, whether some some form of video input like this would be a way to do it. Maybe we need to be thinking it's not just about relying on small meetings
mm,
to do it themselves, but it's that we use maybe 10 minutes or 20-minute sections of some kind of practice like this. Um, you know,
yeah.
I don't
Because
know.
certainly technology, I mean, we tried in our meeting, we haven't got the wherewithal to have like a blended meeting, but when we could go back to meeting after COVID, we realized that people had been joining us who weren't going to be able to join the meeting. And so we kept a Zoom meeting on a Thursday evening for half an hour. It's half an hour meeting for worship and then half an hour chat and social. And what happened, because we wouldn't get as many people, maybe four or five, sometimes less, sometimes it might just be me and someone else, is that after that quiet still time, the discussion and the talk was far deeper than you'd get over coffee. There seemed to be, it was easier,
Yeah.
and people who found coffee, they didn't want a cup of coffee and they went, or they didn't like the chit chat, it was too loud, it was
Hmm.
too there's nothing wrong with social chat, but they wanted something more. We were finding that actually the conversations afterwards were of a completely different level, and people would be talking about, um, prayer, God, their spiritual life.
Yeah.
And we've stopped that now because the numbers dropped, but it's still, yeah. I know that there are lots of Woodbrook courses. There is quite a lot online, but like you say, formalizing it so it becomes like this is what we do could be quite.
Yeah, and I just wonder if there's something that we could be doing in a way that is live on a Sunday morning.
Oh,
I mean, I've only just thought about that really, that if you wanted to tap into something live where we do something, maybe something slightly different each week, but there'd have to be a group of people willing to do it. But and I think this is where partly I think the fact that we don't have we have paid staff and they're not all Quakers, and they're managers, many of
mm,
them. Um, I somebody actually said to me, "What you're doing this, and you're not." you're not paid, this is not a job. You're doing it anyway. It's an awful lot of work for a few hundred views on your. I said, well, I mean, I didn't even. It threw me really because I thought this is a spiritual need to talk
Mm,
like this.
yes,
Um,
definitely.
and although yes, it would be a commitment to try to commit to doing something on Sunday mornings, but I feel completely energized by the thought that has just come out of this conversation.
Mm,
When something is done for the right reasons or from the right place, it's effortless, isn't it?
yes. I mean, I think listening to, I was thinking about the practicalities. Like, I think Zoom, when you join a Zoom session like this, each person, one person per screen, I think when you see like a group of people in a meeting looking at a big screen, I feel it's not so intimate.
No.
But like Experiment with Light, we have online Experiment with Light sessions as well. And we do 3 a month, and people join from all over the world.
Yeah.
So, and then they put in small groups. So I described um, worship, sharing in small groups. So these, and then we put people into breakout rooms. So there'll be 4 or 5 people for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not always, you're not always with the same person, and you might be with someone who's like in Seattle or New Zealand, which is quite amazing. I think once I had somebody who was sort of in tomorrow. They were already in tomorrow and they were on the group. But and that gives you a chance from your own home to share really deep stuff with people in quite a small way. So definitely the technology's there. How
Yes.
you do it, and
Well,
also I
that's
think
right.
yeah. But
Uh,
yeah, good luck, Emma.
it's a shame with Experiment with Light that the Quaker's not in the title there because it's only those of us who know what it is,
Yes, and I
know
think
what it is.
the title's a bit sort of clunky as well. But I was thinking, God, I think we should rebadge it. I mean, I look around town and there's other groups. I mean, we're in a small rural town in Devon, but you're starting to see like um, other little groups, meditation groups, sort of spiritual groups. I think maybe Quakers just haven't
Well,
got their unique selling point.
that's right, and you only need to call it Quaker Light Group and or something that's much more,
Yes. Yeah.
um, yeah, Quaker Light or something. And I mean, like LITE is the problem there as well, which I think is a fair accusation sometimes. So,
Yeah.
oh, it's so
Yeah.
interesting, so interesting. So so let's talk about some of the other things you picked up on then, which you mentioned around the just war. You talked
Yeah.
about that being a real off-putting thing about other
Mm.
churches, and what drew you then to Quakers was this, would you say pacifism particularly, or
I guess it would be pacifism. So I see it as I mean, I try and live peacefully in my life, and but it was the war. It was war specifically that I even now, like I was having a conversation with my friend who is a Quaker, and she was saying, well, Barbara, sometimes I'm thinking that maybe this is necessary. So with my head, thinking with my head, I can think, okay, maybe this is what humanity is all about. Um, Sometimes I get very disappointed with humanity, but
Mm,
sometimes I think if war and war as it is now, I mean, war on battlefields with conscripted soldiers was bad enough, but war now, like a drone can come over now and just,
yeah.
oh. So what am I trying to say? In my absolute core of my being, I sort of don't care whether it's rational, reasonable. It's just this is not right. And sometimes I think if we think war is okay, why don't we think other things are okay? When we think about sort of not letting people die. So
Mm,
it's something really, really deep within me that came, like I said, it came quite quickly because I do remember once saying to my mum, looking at a war memorial, and it said, lest we forget. And that's what they put up at the end of the First World War. Apparently, hardly any memorials were built after the Second World War because they just added the bits to the ones that went up after the First World War. And I remember saying to my mum when I was quite young, oh, but they did forget, didn't they?
Mm.
And my mum said, no, you don't understand it. So I can understand why there might be, with your thinky brain, a good reason. But in my deep in my heart, I just think
So,
it's bad. I'm
so,
not, yeah.
so I'm just wondering, is there a link in your mind? You mentioned like other forms of killing people. So I'm thinking here about the assisted dying bill we have
Mm,
coming through our government's processes now. Um, there's things like abortion.
mm.
It's, um, do you think that this whole kind of moral question about war, are those similar issues for you?
No, not actually, no, because I'm not I'm quite pro-abortion and the assisted dying, I can see both sides, but I'm not completely against it. You know, I can see why that could be a good thing, and I can also see the quite reasonable objections of people who think it's a bad thing. It doesn't affect me in the same way as war, which is not individual choices, it's leaders um, choosing to do something. Quite often people don't have any choice. So yeah,
But
and yeah, mm,
is it about the lesser evil? That if you do this thing, it's a less a least worst outcome, if you like, than the alternative. So, for example, you might say, well, I agree with abortion rights because even though it's a sad thing that there's
yeah,
a potential child being lost, actually the rights of the mother are more important, and it's a much worse outcome if we don't allow it. And could the same be said for war, in that some people, even Quakers, might say something like, well, you have that war there for this amount of time, which prevents this hardship over here.
yeah.
What do you make of all of that?
I completely understand. I completely get the intellectual side of it. Okay, so this is, oh goodness, how many people watch these videos? Funny, John. But okay,
Not
so
many.
this afternoon I'm going to visit my mum and she's in old people's home. Um, so in this country, um, how we cope with the number of older people who need care, and we look after them as we absolutely rightly should. But you could say, what if we didn't look after them? What if we didn't give them those antibiotics? What if you didn't give your mum every chance to recover when she was in hospital 2 years ago?
Mm.
Intellectually and on paper, you'd say, ah, and that's not my view at all, at all. But you could use the same argument, couldn't you, as just war? So for me, it's like a failure of humanity. I
Yeah,
can't explain it any more than that. I completely agree with this idea of lesser evils. I completely get it on paper, but it's something like really deep within me.
yeah,
And when when I first came to Quakers, so about that time, it was because of this war. I was working in a job centre. Now, what's interesting is that when there was conscription, well, it wasn't called job centres then, was it the labour exchange or something? They were the people who um, sent out the conscription letters or something. And I thought, oh my goodness, I might be called upon to do this. I mean, looking back, I think there's no chance you were. But people were talking about that. And I was thinking, okay, so if my manager said, oh, Barbara, now we've found this dusty old memo and this is what you've got to do, what would I do? So I was thinking about those things. I went on one peace march, which was probably the most unpeaceful, scary thing I had done up to that point in London. I went on my own. I just got a ticket from Exeter to London and um, sort of stood next to the most benign looking group I could find. Um, that's the only action. Well, actually, it's not the only action because our town later in the early 2000s had a little peace demonstration in town. We just stood there with our banners. But that's as far as I've gone with that. I'm not like an activist.
Hmm.
It's just I feel so deep down.
A lot of what you say is going to resonate deeply. I suppose I'm pushing just to
Yeah.
see what comes to you really, to kind of bring it to life and to really kind of flesh out what you're saying here. So one of the things I'm thinking about in terms of a war context is this
Yeah.
notion of boundaries and
Yeah.
being firm with boundaries.
Hmm.
Um, and obviously we just have Trump in the US now, who's, you might argue, being very firm. Um, some people say there's going to be less war because he's been so rhetorically firm.
Mm.
And what I want to challenge you with, and see what you
Mm.
think of this, you just told a lovely story about your son's misbehavior.
Yes.
Now, I love that story because I think boundaries and clear parenting and behavior expectations,
Mm.
whatever, is important. And I
Mm.
just wonder if, you see, for me, that's the same on a much different scale. That's the same kind of issue. How do you stop something like actually violent happening by being firmer, not
I know.
softer, firmer?
So it's interesting because I can remember at the time it was happening, thinking a good smack here would
Hmm.
stop it, but I don't smack. And that everyone watching probably thinks what I should be doing is giving a good hard smack, but I don't smack. So I've got to think of another way of dealing with this, which interestingly can take longer. I mean, in this incident, no one was being physically hurt, don't think. Um, you so it does take longer. And with parenting, you're in it for the long term. And now my son is just the most lovely young man. Um, and he doesn't agree with violence. And so I think you're in it for the long term. So with parenting, so I don't really want to think about it as war, but there was this feeling that I don't smack. So I'm going to have to think of something different to do here. Um, and also, what's the time? Are we still okay?
It's fine.
But a picture that came to me. It was like we had a poster of Darwin's Tree of Life that came free with something, and it starts with like with the little amoeba, whatever it is at the bottom, and then all the branches come off. And sometimes I think when there's conflict, we're at the top of one of these little branches, these little twigs, and we sort of add more twigs. Like we could do this or do that, or if we do that, that's going to happen. And it gets more and more complicated. But if we go right back to the source, which again I would see as love, right back to the source, what's really going on here? And it's not just a question of sorting out this little conflict. It's why has that conflict got to be like that at all? And if we really take time to go back, I mean, this is impossible with like international relations now. I can't see how that happened. But then I feel that's what should happen. I don't know
Yeah.
how that works. And so I guess I'm probably never going, well, hopefully I might be. I don't know if I'm called to do something. What what stand will I take? I think COVID taught me that I'm absolutely don't like breaking laws, even if I think the laws are stupid, which is a bit of a disappointment for me, really. So I don't know if I was really put to the test what I'd do. But
Tell me more about that. I'm interested in that.
oh, okay. It's nothing to do with Quakers really, but in a way it is because it's so there were rules and laws which when COVID came about, I absolutely firmly believed this is a virus. The way to stop a virus is to stop it spreading. And there are all these things that we were told to do or not do to prevent it spreading. Then we learnt more about how the virus spreads. So I did wear masks when I was expected to wear masks, and I really strictly stuck to the thing about not having people in your house. And my dad died during COVID, not of COVID. So
Mm.
we had to have a small funeral, which was okay for our family. That was fine. Um, but some of my children were living away, so I had to get special permission to actually book into a travel lodge. And my immediate family, me and my children, one of them was living in a city which had really, really high COVID rates. And they were traveling down to Sleepy Little Devon, and they were really aware of that, and they stuck to the rules. Um, and then as I thought, some of these rules, we've still got the rules, but I'm not absolutely convinced they're helping. I don't think it's going to make any difference if I do this when I've been told not to. But I
Mm.
still stuck to the rule. And
Yeah.
the ironic thing was I was in the end the one that gave my mum COVID, and I'd been sticking to the rules so seriously.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and I was really surprised at myself.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it's fascinating because I think, the Christian way, I think, and certainly the Quaker way, is to do what God leads you to
I
do.
know.
And there is something in advice and queries, isn't it, about kind of doing what God wants you
Yes,
to do
yes.
first and foremost.
And I
And
guess in that situation, I didn't think it wasn't a moral. I don't think it was a moral thing that I was doing. There was one incident where I thought actually maybe I should have broken the rule in that instance. But
yeah.
yeah, when it comes to like what God,
Because I think if you think love is the abiding driver here, there were people who didn't comfort family members,
yeah,
especially when they're dying.
yes, yeah,
Um, so I did, you see, I broke a rule once to go and see a friend for the last time before she died. Um, and I have no regrets about that
no,
whatsoever.
no, yeah,
And to push people through an isolated death is, I just think that's awful.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
awful. And so to be firm in rules which you're not entirely sure about their efficacy anyway. Um, so
yeah. It's
I think there's a
interesting
bit
though.
there's
It's
too
so
much
interesting.
conformity perhaps from Quakers.
Yeah. Or oh, it's just me personally, because there are Quakers that put themselves on the front line and go to prison. And that's so yeah. But anyway, so
No, but
that
that was the rule. I mean, I was employed prison chaplain through COVID, and I was allowed to go in, and I still went in. Um, all the volunteers were stopped.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. So it's just interesting, taught me something about myself.
Yes,
But
exactly. An interesting moral question. So let's finish then with your hopes for the future, or perhaps your fears as well. But what are your hopes for the future for Quakers?
my hope for the future is that what I have found, I'm able to share with other people. Um, I've seen our local meeting really shrink, but we still meet, and our numbers that important. No, that's not true when I say our numbers that important. It's just that somebody else, a different part of my life, went to a meeting of a completely different thing and said, "Oh, this was the biggest meeting that this organization had ever had." And there were 20 people there. And I was thinking, and they were really pleased. There were 20 people. So as I really don't like committees. I don't think I'm good at that kind of thing. And Quakers is like built on that.
Mm.
I feel that for me, the Quaker structure that was set up by George Fox was sort of to protect this little thing that they'd found to make sure that that still existed. And what I fear is that what was built to protect that, that this thing's like little and the big thing is very big.
Mm.
Um, so, and because I don't feel comfortable with committees and doing things like that, I'm glad there are other people who do that, but I think the structure seems very big for what is the core. Um, our meeting used to have lots of children and they grew up and they And we haven't got any children coming regularly to meeting at the moment. That's quite sad. And the meeting's so small that I think it might be quite, not frightened, but like, if we do outreach, can we cope if we get lots of people coming in? So, yeah, I would like to think Quakers were still around, but what I really would like is that we're sort of focused, we really get to the nub of what are we about? What is
Mhm.
Quakers about? That's what I would like to see happening in the future. Yeah.
Well, that's great. That's great. And I think we've lots of what you've said there has resonated with me. So
Hmm.
and I'm sure it will with many people as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you sound very optimistic actually and hopeful for the future.
Well, what I have found is not going to change. If there's no meeting for me to go to, I will still be doing what I do.
Mm.
And hopefully we'll find some other people that that resonates with.
Yeah.
But yes, that's where I am at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. And if yeah, if God wants Quakers to continue, then Quakers will continue. And if not, not. Well, thank you so much for spending time with me and
Well, no,
talking with
thank
me
you. It's
about
been enjoyable.
yeah.
Thank you. All right.